In a peaceful suburb where the biggest drama was usually a misplaced trash bin, no one expected chaos. But when two fake HOA enforcers crossed the wrong driveway and hurt the wrong kid, an old man reminded the world that real strength doesn't need a badge, just courage, purpose, and a garden hoe. This is the story of Grandpa Earl, and the day the neighborhood woke up. It was the kind of morning that made you forget anything bad could ever happen. The sun stretched lazily across the quiet suburb, painting driveways and porches with warm gold. Lawn sprinklers ticked rhythmically. Birds chirped from tidy hedges. And in the middle of all this peacefulness, a boy named Jack laughed as he zoomed down his driveway on a scratched-up blue scooter, his red helmet slightly crooked on his head. Jack was 7 years old and the kind of kid who made adventure out of everything. To him, every sidewalk crack was a canyon, every mailbox a checkpoint. And today, like most days, Grandpa Earl sat on the porch, pruning his roses and keeping a gentle eye on his grandson. Earl had lived through 2 wars and outlived almost every friend he'd ever had. His knuckles were swollen from years of manual work, and his silence was more eloquent than most men's speeches. He wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. Jack was his world now. The boy had lost his father 2 years ago to a highway accident. Since then, it had just been Earl, Jack, and quiet routines. That morning felt like any other. Until it didn't. A gray SUV dented, unwashed, and humming like a wounded animal lurched to a stop in front of Earl's house. 2 men stepped out wearing black, tactical-style shirts with faux HOA enforcement patches stitched sloppily onto the shoulders. Their belts had more accessories than authority walkie-talkies, zip ties, clipboards. One man was massive and wide-shouldered, the kind of guy who cracked his knuckles before speaking. The other was wiry, twitchy, eyes always darting. Earl squinted. Something was off. Without warning, the bigger man, later identified only as Hulk in the reports, strode up to Jack. No warning, no explanation. Just one swift kick to the scooter. The sound of metal against concrete rang out like a gunshot. Jack toppled over, palms and knees scraping open. Blood trickled, thin and bright. Earl stood up. Slowly, silently. Jack looked at him, eyes wide, holding back tears. He wasn't afraid of pain. He was afraid for his grandfather. And that's when something shifted in the air. Earl didn't yell. He didn't run. He simply walked to the edge of the garden, where an old hoe leaned casually against a flower bed. He picked it up, tested the weight like an old friend returning home, and turned to face the men. Hulk was still smirking. "Control your brat before we fine you for non-compliance," he said, voice full of mock authority. "You touch him again," Earl said, voice quiet and gravelly. "And you won't walk away." The smaller man laughed. "You gonna chase us with your rake, Grandpa?" What happened next was recorded from 3 different angles. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves were now watching from windows, porches, and behind fences. Phones came out. Earl didn't swing wildly. He moved like someone who had once known combat. The first blow knocked Hulk sideways, the hoe's wooden shaft hitting with terrifying precision across his ribs. The second strike swept the smaller man's knees out from under him, sending him face first into a patch of mulch. Gasps. Silence. Then, the unmistakable sound of a phone dialing 911. Hulk groaned on the sidewalk, clutching his side, unable to get up. His partner crawled toward the SUV, only to be kicked lightly in the hip by Earl, not a cruel kick. Just enough to say you're not going anywhere. Sirens arrived fast. 2 sheriff deputies stepped out of their cruiser with wary eyes. They saw the battered SUV, the fallen men in fake uniforms, the scraped-up boy, and the old man standing tall with a hoe in one hand and quiet fury in the other. "Drop the weapon," one officer said. Earl obliged, gently lowering it to the grass. Jack ran to his grandfather's side. "I'm okay. Grandpa," he said, voice trembling. One deputy cuffed the two men, who were now babbling about collecting HOA fines and enforcing local code. But the IDs in their wallets were fake. The enforcement patches were from a costume site. Their clipboard was blank. The SUV registered under a fake address. What they had really been doing, it turned out, was going house to house, targeting elderly residents with fake violations and demanding cash settlements. That day, they picked the wrong lawn. The sheriff's report would later credit Earl with reasonable force in defense of a minor. No charges were filed. The footage made its way online, and within 24 hours, Grandpa Earl became a hero. #Ho Justice trended nationwide. Talk shows called. Journalists camped outside the house. A local reporter asked Earl if he had any regrets. "I regret not swinging harder," he said without smiling. But fame never interested Earl. What mattered was the neighborhood. Because something changed after that day. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years started organizing. A community board was formed, not an HOA, but a volunteer group focused on safety and support. Younger parents brought cookies. Teens offered to mow lawns. People checked in on each other. The fake enforcers had come to divide and intimidate. But all they'd done was wake up a sleepy neighborhood. As for Jack, his scooter was replaced with a new one by a neighbor who owned a sporting goods store. But he insisted on keeping the old one to the dented, scraped-up blue scooter that had started it all. He called it the Witness. One evening, weeks after it all settled down, Jack sat beside Earl on the porch. "Were you scared?" Jack asked. Earl thought for a long moment. "I was scared of losing more family," he said finally. "You didn't," Jack whispered. "No," Earl said, putting a calloused hand on the boy's shoulder. "We gained one." From that day on, the neighborhood never saw another fake enforcer. But the old hoe stayed by the porch, weathered and silent, like a symbol, not of violence, but of a line that could not be crossed. And behind it, always, stood a man who knew exactly when to act.